Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Lighting Director Skillset from Clubs to Arenas and Beyond, presented by Sarah Parker. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after the presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Session Workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Parker, the presenter for today's webinar. Sarah Sparks Parker is a Las Vegas-based lighting director. In her 5 years of touring experience, Sarah has had the pleasure of working with a variety of well-known artists, including Imagine Dragons, Logic, Neon Trees, State Motel, and more. And now I'll pass it over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Laura. Let's jump right in. Before we get too deep, I want to go over some assumptions that I'm going to be making about the situation you're in for this webinar. First of all, you're just the LD, not the designer or programmer. Or if you are, that part of the process has already been completed. Second, you're working for the headlining artist. Things tend to work a little bit different when you're for the opening act, so we're not really going to touch on that today. Also, this is talking about a tour situation when you're doing a lot of repetitive things day to day. I will talk a little bit about festivals or one-offs later on. It's also for structured non-EDM shows. What I mean by that is it's more or less the same set list every day, and it's been pre-programmed, not run live. We're going to look at both club and arena tours individually, starting with the club. Certain aspects are going to apply more to one than the other, and then at the end we'll do like a general overview of certain elements of being a lighting director. Another note is that what I call arenas is also going to apply to amphitheaters, or I might refer to them as sheds, those all being outdoor venues of a larger scale. Clubs will also include a lot of smaller theaters. And this webinar is by no means comprehensive. I can't possibly cover every aspect of being a lighting director during it, as well as when I get to things like focusing lights. It's more of a general tip overview than a step-by-step process. I also want to include a quick note of why I think this webinar is important, because I often hear the job described as lighting operator, but the main focus of what you do is going to be a lot of things beyond just operating the show. So we're going to look at what that all entails. I wanted to give a little bit more of a career background so that some of the things I talk about are a bit more understandable. I personally went the college route where I also briefly studied both scenic design and architecture. So I have a bit of a background in other visual elements, which aids me, and I'll talk about that in the clubs. I briefly toured as a lighting tech for a few of this first group of artists listed, as well as doubling as lighting director for Andrew Peterson and Taylor Green. After that, I took a little break from the road to do some full-time vectorworks and design work, and then found myself back on the road in the past 2 years. A lot of the console programming I learned has actually been since the Neon Trees era, and I think that was helpful because I hadn't yet developed too many bad habits, and I was able to learn from a lot of great designers, while also having an opportunity to kind of play around because when I was working for Neon Trees, there was no designer at the time, so it was a great time to kind of learn on the console and see how the output works and go through a normal day kind of on my own terms. And I think that's a great way to learn, as well as being adaptable to what other people have to offer. So let's start with clubs. Here are 2 examples of shows I have been lighting director on. Most recently was State Motel, which actually finished this March. I wanted to start with a day breakdown to kind of look at how your day will flow. First thing is going to be walking the space. I usually do this about an hour before I let in. I like to meet the house LD, see how much they're going to help. There's a typical expectation of them helping run your SMAKE, which is your data and power to run the house, tie you into power for your lighting distro, and provide you with the house patch. But a lot of times they'll be able to go beyond that and help you with the physical load-in. It's kind of a good time to suss out the situation And if they are more willing to help, do utilize them. The more help you can get in a club situation, the better. I also like to ask them if there's going to be anything unusual going on that day. For example, I've been in situations where getting a ladder or a lift to focus front lights has only been able to happen before a certain amount of time. And like once doors open, obviously, like you'll never get that then. But you need to kind of plan out if there's any oddities during the day. Also, before load-in, I like to mark out the stage. I always have a special drawing where I take the design drawing from the designers, kind of strip it down to just what I need for loading in with all of the dimensions on it. Because in this role, you'll often act as a stage manager. Because a lot of the things that are on stage are in your role. So you're going to be the one to make sure everything fits. It's also important to find a path and storage for dead cases so that nothing is trapped when you need to get to them later. It's also really important to get your risers set before load-in. That way, even though it becomes an obstacle for cases to go around, you're absolutely certain of spacing when everything needs to come in. For the actual load-in, you're going to want to start on stage. It's really important to know how to divide labor between yourself and hands. Most recently on St. Motels, I had a lot of repetitive video elements where it was easier for me to train the local hands how to do the one thing once and kind of set them to work, while I had at the same time a very confusing cable package for the floor lights, which is everything we toured with. And it just made more sense for me to divide my own labor into doing that instead of having to explain that. After you're done on stage, you're going to work your way to front of house. You're going to often be crammed in this situation. So just be ready for minimal surface space. You'll often have to share it with the front of house engineer. If you have anything like a front of house or active on the floor, be ready for that. Just make sure everything's accessible. Once the console's up and running, staging is the most important thing first thing. I think it's really important to be smart with your naming method. That way, when you work for a lot of artists, you can always refer back to a certain show file. I always start with the artist, because that's usually the most important thing. And then the date. I find starting with year is important because a lot of times it's sorted by that. So if you have 2 shows that have happened on June 18th with the same artist, we can kind of go back to back. So make sure that year is first. I like to include city for more context and version. My own personal trick is after the version number, I like to put a status. So in this example over here, EOD means end of day. That's after the show is done, to just kind of do a final save on it. I like to do, for example, I'll have like a version 4 that says V4 clone. What that means is I've completely finished cloning all of my pictures, or V5 focus, or I've completely finished focusing. That way, if I make a mistake with my show file later on, I can go back to that point and know where I've completed and what I need to redo. Next thing you're going to do is check everything in your rig. This is really important because if you have any issues with your touring rig, a lot of times it's way more important in the programming than the house fixtures. And you can even sometimes use your holdover focus from the previous day, which is really important that everything works. Prioritize that over the house rig. Cloning is the process of, if you're unfamiliar, adapting the lights that have been programmed into the show file to what is in the current venue or the festival. I'm not going to get really deep into this because that would be 11 hours worth of information, but I'll talk about a few strategies for that under the festivals. Focusing, usually this gets crammed in because of the shorter days of the club tour. I like to do all of my focus during sound check to maximize the time with people on stage. Just because a lot of the overhead is smaller, so things will look a lot different with people on stage, especially in this environment, versus an arena where you can kind of get a better picture with a bigger amount. I do not focus front light during sound check though, because it's distracting. I like to do that after, actually, where I stand on stage and direct the lighting. I find that's actually easier than using someone else. You can get a little bit more precise with it. Just make sure that you take into account height differences. In my example, I'm only 5'6", so sometimes I have to put a hand above my head to kind of simulate a nice point to focus to for bands. Showtime, I'll dive into a lot more later because a lot of that applies to both clubs and arenas. And loadout. You're going to want to maximize space in all of your cases during rehearsal and really, really have a thorough plan. The hands are going to be working as fast as they can to get you out, but it's really important that you oversee everything and make sure everything goes in its place. There's a common saying that it's all about the out, which is true, but if you can't find something or something is broken the next day, that's entirely fine. I also want to talk about a few things that are really important to clubs. They're also important to arenas, but you'll find yourself doing them more. The first is versatility. Learn as much as you can about theatrical lighting or gel. A lot of the club house people will have you drop gel in. Have a general familiarization with your colors so that you can communicate easily instead of having to pull out a gel book. Like know a basic red, a basic green, a basic blue. House rigs may not be ideal for your show. It's the versatility here is learning how to take the design ideas and make sure that you have the same visual elements, even if you have a smaller rig. Creative problem solving beyond lighting. Sometimes you're going to be in weird situations, space or props or something like that. Learn how to just come up with solutions to problems that aren't necessarily what you're used to. Same thing with physical problems. You're going to have a lot of low ceilings, a lot of tight spaces. You might have to modify cable runs. You might have to figure out a trailer pack. Just be aware of space in general. And other visual skills are a plus. This is one reason why I'm really glad I went the college route and have a lot of Adobe Photoshop experience. I've been in situations with artists where there's been a video wall I didn't know about and I haven't had any content provided. So it's been a matter of making that on the fly. It's really also important to expect the unexpected. Anything can really happen at this point. I also want to talk very briefly about teamwork. At this level, you might find yourselves doing things that are way above and beyond just lighting. Like I said, the trailer pack, playing stage manager, helping pack up or count merch. It's really all about being part of a team and seeing that you're willing to work that will get you to other levels. I also want to note that it's a good thing to know when there's a potential problem, you can work with your touring crew team to kind of help them or have them aid you in lighting. So, for example, sometimes I've been in a small room with a hazer where I don't have control of the hand output. I recognize that as a potential problem, and I talk to somebody that is working on stage, like, hey, if this happens, I'll radio for you, or I'll be on talkback. Here's where the switch is so that it's not a delay issue. Next, let's get into arenas a bit. Once again, day breakdown. One thing I love about arenas is you probably get to sleep in. It's really important to sort everything out for a show ahead of time. So if you are in a smaller space or somewhere outdoors where you can't hang everything, all of that should be sorted out ahead of time with your chief or tour rigger so that you don't have to wake up early and sort out a problem with physical spacing. First thing I like to do is wake up and say hello to my crew. It's a good time to gauge if it's going to be a slow or a fast day at this point. It's also really important to get your snake to front of house. Again, that's your data and your power to your console. Even if it's a temporary run just for power, get it as early as you can. A lot of times you can use the time offline without control of the rig to do some edits in the show file. Just maximize your time on that console. Once again, save first thing. You're just going to have less defined steps during the day because you generally won't be cloning, as the touring rig will be very consistent day to day. There's going to be a lot of back and forth with focus. Focus is going to be your single biggest thing during the day. So watch when things go up, know when they're actually at trim. Don't try to focus anything before it's at trim, you're just wasting your time. If you're in an outdoor venue, learn how to focus in broad daylight, and I'll get to a tip on that later. You can also use the skills for focusing outdoors in an arena before waiting for house lights to get turned off. I personally am very guilty of focusing all my lights with house lights still on. Even if you do that and you're comfortable, it's very important to turn them off at some point during the day. Because, for example, there might be like an upper concourse where there's still a light on. And if you don't identify that during the day, it can negatively impact the show if it's blowing through video walls behind. It's also better to just verify everything, especially in tight focuses with sharper beams. Just with those lights off, just get it done for 5 minutes. I'm actually going to back up a little bit to setting up front of house. I personally have never had a front of house tech, so I make sure during rehearsals for the show I know exactly how to set up the rack for the tour and practice it myself, because you don't want to be calling your crew chief or someone on your crew out to explain it to you on the first day of the show, because Loden is going to be doing a lot over at that point. I'm also really, really particular about how I set up my front of house. I like to have everything exactly the same every day, just down to even how tables are taped. I like to do that because the more control I have over my environment, the more ready I am for anything that might come up that's different. When you're in an arena, you're going to be able to do a general same layout. Sometimes when you're in an outdoor venue, you might have to get a bit more creative with space. Just always make sure if you do have a backup console, even if it's hidden under somewhere, that you do have access to it just in case. Once you're done with focus and testing, you're going to do a handoff to the opening act, assuming that there is one for an arena show. It's really important to give them as much time as you can. Don't cut what you need for your show short. At the start of the tour, it's probably going to be not a whole lot of time you can give them. Just remember your show is a priority and you'll get it sorted. But it's still really important to take care of them. It's a really great way to build relationships, and the artists might also see that you're helping them in the future. A lot of times it will be someone on your own lighting crew that's trying to run the opening artist, which really helps negotiate the time. I like to insist on being there whenever there's a file switch on the console, just to make sure that nothing negative has happened to my show file by accident. And I always reload the show file from my USB, just because I'm certain of the state of that. Sometimes, too, if you don't load the file correctly, the networking might be changed, and it's harder to diagnose that during the changeover time. It's really important to have a pre-show routine, because once again, the more you can control day to day, the more ready you are for things that might go wrong. I like to grab a new radio battery so there's no chance of it running out during the show, and mark up my set list. I really recommend marking the set list, even if it's the same exact show every day, and even if you've already marked it up. It really helps commit any important notes to memory. For me, it's often follow spot colors. So if there's like a half CTB and that's frame 1, I'll mark it as 1 with a little note at the top. You can just communicate to your follow spots frame 1 and everyone is on the same page. I also mark any special effects notes, especially if I'm calling it, even if I'm not, it's good to be aware of that. Or any special notes. For example, I've worked for an artist that was very big on stopping songs early or restarting them, but not consistently every day. So for me, it was a reminder that that was potential, even though I was always ready for it. We'll get more into the follow spot meeting later. Changeover is really important. There's a lot of things you can utilize this time. We'll talk about that in focus as well. For the show time, you'll at least have one person from your crew on headset with you in case anything goes wrong. It will usually be dimmer tech. On Logic, I had a wonderful crew chief who sat with me in front of house, which was really useful, not just to joke around, but if something did go wrong, I could physically point at it instead of trying to explain it, and then he kind of take over and relay it to his crew what needed to happen. Loadout in this situation is probably going to go really quickly for you. Once again, I've never had a front of house tech, so I've done my own loadout there. I always save an end of day file, which becomes the next day's file, just keeping that routine going. I also like to make sure that I stay at the front of house area until I see all of my dots. I never want to walk away and just assume it's going to be there. It might take you a little bit of time to get hands to help you put your console into its case, but in this situation, what's happening on stage is way more important than what you're doing out there. You might even be able to borrow from other departments like carpentry just to do that flip. And I really want to talk about your role on the team at an arena level. And I know that the relationship between designers and lighting directors has been covered by other webinars in this series, but I wanted to talk about my personal experience with it. I think the basic job description is ensuring that all the visuals are as the designer intends, with the obvious focus on implementing lighting. What that means is you're going to be working really closely with other departments to make sure everything visually is functioning correctly. So talking with the video director, making sure anything between their systems is great, making sure they're all good to go and they have what they need for the day, making sure that all special effects are working. It's kind of on you to double check all of that. I don't think that it necessarily overlaps with production manager duties, but you're just kind of the go-to visual point. And that may not always be the case on every tour, but it's something to be ready for taking that responsibility. It's also important that if things are not up to the standard of the design, that you get them fixed as best as you can. This can be a really delicate topic. It's never an active follow through, but things do need to get fixed. Always be on the lookout every single day. You can have the best crew ever, and it might be show 30 of a run, but things might still get a little messed up. Because your crew, at the end of the day, their job is to make sure everything is up safely and working correctly, whereas your job is to make sure it looks right. So just be an extra set of eyes during load-in, watch as things go up, try to fix things early, and just don't be afraid to speak up. It's all for the good of the show. You may need to build a test page for your crew. This will be a page in your show file where you have different raters that test different parts of the lights so that they can see everything's working and going up. A lot of times they'll have their own console near them, near Dimmer Beach, which is where all of the distro, all of the data is condensed. They'll have that during load-in where they can run it themselves, but it's good for you to kind of oversee how that's put together. Just because something's on and moving doesn't mean it's necessarily entirely working correctly. So be really comprehensive with your main test rater for every type of light. But then I like to also have either a second page or a side of that that's just a simple on or off that you can use during changeover without making the lights go confused. That's especially important for floor packages, which is all of your lighting fixtures on the floor. A lot of times they'll have to get moved out of the way in order to allow the opener, load in, load off, and we'll have to get physically reconnected, so always run through the during changeover. It's really important to know your rig technically. I know that sounds really obvious, but it's an important part of why I like that I was a tech early on in my career. Since you're the main eyes on the show, you can often diagnose things quicker the more familiar you are with it. Like, for example, one time I saw a series of lights misbehaving, and I knew from looking at the plot that they were all in the same universe. So I was able, instead of just telling my crew, oh, there's a problem here, I was able to quickly step in and diagnose it and get it fixed sooner. Also, good idea to be aware of your fixture numbers, which are going to be the numbers your crew refers to them, which are not necessarily the same numbers you refer to the lights in the console. A lot of times you might have the same light go rogue, and if you can refer to them, oh, that's fixture 42 or 104, then that saves time getting that resolved as well instead of someone having to go look at a plot. I've also always been my own media server tech. I'm not going to get into video a whole lot here, but it's really important that anything on your end of the suite or at front of house is something that you are familiar with and able to diagnose. Briefly working with designers, know what questions to ask. That's going to change for every show. An example will be if you have to squish things for the day, what are the ideal shapes and spacing for things in the rig? If you need to make an aesthetic call, generally you'll have the same trim heights every day, but when that changes, How do you change it? Know where you stand in the handoff. What's your relationship with the designer? Have you worked with them for a while? Is it your first time? What's that level of trust? A lot of times a new song will get added during the run. What do? Do you call them? Do you do it yourself? If the artist wants to change something absolutely major, what do? I'm not saying there's ever a right answer here, but it's a good idea to be familiar with that before it happens. It's also really important to learn the designer or programmer's style so that if you do get to add or modify things, that it's still in line with everything they've done and not your own personal style. And within those bounds of the relationship, take as much control of the show file as you can. You're going to be the one out there running it every single day. Make sure everything's laid out for you. Don't be afraid to take some control. Very briefly on festivals or one-offs, know how to clone. Know what's important for every focus and know key moments that will be affected. For example, I've done a show where there's 3 consecutive moments of lights going in this, just a bump, bump, bump. When you're cloning, you need to be aware of moments like that so that it's not going all over the place. Sometimes it doesn't always make sense to clone for a specific moment of the show, so know what to check and know what you might have to go back and manually reprogram. Really important to know your show in and out, and I will mention that way more times before we're done. Just know all of the key moments and where things might have special needs. Know when to work in advance. I would say a lot of times there are going to be minor differences between the plot you're given ahead of time and what you see when you get to site. And use your judgment on whether you're going to go through and do all of your layouts for your show file or if you're cloning ahead of time. If you have the whole overnight to work, it's just better to do it on site. That way you're not redoing anything you've already done. However, if you're doing a radio festival where there's 10 different artists and you only have an hour worth of read, then you're going to want to maximize your time ahead of time. Sometimes you might have input on the plot. Again, this is with the relationship with the designer, how much control you have once the show is out. Know what's important to fight for and what isn't. If you do need a specific type of light, know when to fight for that versus if another light will work just the same. Know those key moments in the show. You also might be better off with a smaller console and more lights. So have your show file adaptable to run on different physical size consoles. You're going to need more space and more surface and more theaters for the initial programming, and if you have the room during an arena show. But especially if you have a lot of timecode events, you're not going to need to see everything all the time. So reconfigure it so that you can either switch views or are able to move around quickly. Use all the time you can get. This one is so important to me. Just because it's not your scheduled time doesn't mean that you can't be out there at front of house waiting. Oftentimes there will be a backup console that's offline that you can get a lot of work done without control of the rig. And be present before your time slot. A lot of times people will finish early. You're just really going to want to maximize every single moment you get. It's also a really great way to impress other designers, to be honest. And that all said, if you are doing an overnight programming shift and you're 95% of the way there and it's 6 a.m. and you're all tired, don't bother with that last 5%. It's good enough, especially for a festival. Things are just going to go wrong. Make sure you and your crew get some sleep. Not really going to talk about international. Just be ready for things to be different, especially different picture types than what you're used to in your own country. If there is a language barrier, make sure you learn some basic follow spots commands. Don't count on people to know your own language, because it's still on you to make sure the show's good. Next, I'm going to kind of divert into my actual toolbox. On the next slide, we'll look at everything that I carry with me on tour. First thing, most important, is always carry a notebook. If you have a crazy day or a one-off coming up, a lot of times it's useful to write out everything you know needs to be done in advance. I'm always writing down notes. If I forgot to do something during the day and I need to do it during changeover, I write that down. I also always take notes during the show, which become the next day's action items. Pelican kit, that's what we're going to look at on the next slide. My joke is that everything I carry in it is just full of things I should never ever need, but I've used every single thing in it at least once. If you're doing a festival run, be extra prepared. You might be in the field in the middle of nowhere and not able to get extra gear. On club tours, I keep my Pelican in the bay of the bus, which is down below, just to make sure I can get to it first thing in the morning, measure out, mark the stage. But on arenas, I make sure it goes in the truck as part of the lighting package. A lot of times it makes its way out to front of house for me. I also keep a separate backpack, or if you have a Pelican, that's where a lot of your electronics are going to go. For me, it's like my iPad, my laptop, and my USB with all my show files. That way, if I need it on an off day, it's more convenient and more protected. Be intentional about where you keep things. And by this, if you're doing a lot of fly dates, make sure you have everything you absolutely need for the show with you, so that if your baggage gets lost, you're not screwed over. Just be aware of having to work on off days and how you're going to get everything you need. So here's every single thing in my toolbox. Most of it is here for a specific purpose. So I'm going to go through a lot of it actually and explain why. Timecode kit is just for running playback during the day and making sure everything works. I have a second timecode kit with an audio interface. That's more useful during rehearsals and programming, but I often go down to the much smaller kit during the actual tour. Ethernet to USB, even though my laptop has them built in, a lot of these adapters you'll see later on are just extra. I always keep a network switch with me. I've had to actually put it into the system on a few festivals where one failed, or even once on a tour, the one I carried with me went in to save the day once. Console tape, a lot of people are like, why would you take console tape? You can label everything on the console. For me, it's writing notes at the top. For example, if I'm calling confetti cue, and I want a very visible reminder not to forget it, I'll write it right on the top. Paintbrush is going to be mainly for your outdoor shows to just keep dust and dirt off of your console. USB kit, for me, this is a little hub with 4 different USB. I never, ever, ever save just once on the console or on one USB. I always have a lot of redundancy. I have had issues where it hasn't saved on a particular USB, so that has saved me. Wireless router for remote focus. That allows me with my iPad to focus from the stage, which I'll talk about later. Surge protector with USB ports. That's for front of house for my personal gear. Split 6 is an audio element where it'll take one XLR in and split it out to 6 out. A lot of times it's useful when you have time code going to both your lighting console and back to video. Usually the tour will have one, but it's always spare. Sometimes audio might need an extra one for broadcast. Just have things that are useful for other people. Totem, that's what I call my little toy that goes with me at front of house. I like to make sure that I have everything consistent, something unique to my personality. It's just kind of a fun thing I take with me on the tour. iPad, I upload all of the tracks to the iPad so that I'm not fumbling around on my phone and then just ready to go. It's also what I use for focus on stage. Got a few adapters. Got a multimeter. I don't know how to use it, but other people do. And a lot of times they will use it and they will need it, and just be that person who has things that other people need. Voltage tester, gloves, super glue, especially on club tours. Something might fall apart, but you need super glue. Flashlights. One of my favorite tricks on a club tour is having a little flashlight with me at all times to get through the crowd. Because a lot of times they're packed in. It's not really an issue on arenas where you have a moat to get out to front of house. But when you're running from the stage and back, it's just good to shine a light. Mini screwdriver set is specifically for if I need to open up a console on the inside. Multi-tools on me all the time. A lot of these last few things are just general utility. Fan for outdoors. And the gel kit. If you're on a tour where you're able to order gel and it's not all used, it's often good to just have that with you for future uses. And next we're going to talk about focus, which is probably the single most important part of your job, especially at an arena level. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, just a few specific tricks I've learned along the way, and again, not the full thing through. Dot focus is the single most important thing you'll ever learn when it comes to focus. What this is focusing all of your lights, or at least all of one type of light, to a single point, usually at the back behind you in an arena or an outdoor show. Focus everything to that single point, and then you can spread it out mathematically to create all of the graphical focuses. Sometimes you might need to use more than one dot, just depending on the positioning of the lights. You can't get everything to the same point. Sometimes you might not have a good point to focus to, so be resourceful. You might just go in front of house. It's also important to keep in mind when you're doing that, as you spread things out, it's not going to ever be perfect. They might kind of droop a little bit, but once again, you can mathematically in the console adjust for that. And that's how I achieve things like in this photo on Logic, which is not perfect, but it's the best way to make sure everything's aligned. What it really does is it overrides any potential shifts in how the lights are hung. So instead of pointing everything straight forward, you're going to have slight variances, whereas if you take everything to a single point, it's all going to look better day to day. It's really important to have a consistent order for your focusing. So many of them are going to build off of other ones. This is important too, prioritizing certain elements. So generally, you're going to do your straight focuses first, like straight high, straight mid, straight low. And then you'll usually have a fan focus, which spreads out from that. I would usually take like a straight mid or whatever is easiest to see from where I'm at in front of house, and then create that level of fan, and then take that fan to a high, a mid, and a low, versus having the height match the straight. It's more important that when you have that fan established, that it can move from all those positions without things changing this way. One thing I always like to make sure I remember about focus is it's never ever about a static position. So much of it is about how things move. If you have a moment in the show where there's a big sweep, and your high and your low focuses aren't really all that different, you're not going to have that moment. So keep in mind that it's always moving. Really important to know when to invest in perfection. This more applies to the club level. I never do the dot focus that I just explained at the club. Generally, I can do pretty close to my holdover in my touring floor package, or the house rig is going to be hung so well because it's permanent that things are straight and they are actually straight. And you usually will have a lot less tight beam fixtures, where if things are a little off, it's not going to be obvious. So don't waste your time where you don't need to. Build a page that will aid you in focus. What this means is you're going to want to put all of your lights in something tight beamed and saturated like a dark blue. And then when you go through them, make sure that when they highlight, which is singling them out, that they then go to white and make sure that they stay in that tight beam. It's going to save you so much time to have this pre-built than trying to do that every day. If you can, use an iPad as a remote participant stage. This even sometimes is useful during club tours. When there's specials being a light focused on a specific person or scenic element, it's not just lighting the air. I like to do the iPad on stage myself instead of having a helpful crew member kind of guide me. A lot of times too, you might have a lot of lights to a specific point, like for a backlight coming in. It's just better to see it for yourself and have the capability to wander over. Make sure you've got a clear understanding from the designer what every focus is. That way, when you do need to adapt, you are staying true to the actual design. Especially in an arena, don't rely on the holdover from the show file. Generally, it's easier on clubs. You can get a better idea of where things are supposed to be. But don't ever load up a show file in an arena and be like, oh, this is how the focus looks From yesterday's lights to now, things will have shifted a bit more in the air. Just commit everything to memory and don't go off of that holdover focus. If you need to take photos in rehearsal, do that. Don't feel like a dork. It's just going to save you so much hassle later. Sometimes focuses also tend to shift over time or evolve, and sometimes it's okay if it's just trying to do something that looks cool in the air, but you really want to just make sure it's still what the designer intended. I talked a little bit about specials or a practical focus. Those are often going to be more important. Practical focus being something that's actually lighting a person or scenery or something on stage. Graphical is more what we're looking at in this photo here, where it's about how it looks in the air. Just understand the differences and the intentions between all focuses between the two. Show operation. So important to learn how to safely edit on the fly. Be really confident in what you can and can't do during the show if you need to fix something. Stage output is what matters. I see a lot of people get lost in what I call macro land and so many theaters and everything. But at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like it's really benefiting what's happening on stage. So for example, I've had issues with some songs in a big show file over time. For some reason, they just didn't fade out at the end. Instead of going back and fixing it, which didn't make sense in that particular situation, we just pulled the master down because it's the same stage output. Things will go wrong. I cannot say that enough. I've had so many unexpected things go wrong to the point where I'm just not afraid of it anymore. It's all about that level of confidence during the show. I definitely haven't handled every one of those situations right, but it's good to have kind of a bank of potential fixes, like people need to walk off stage or, you know, the PA goes down. There's kind of a general way to handle that. So if you don't think you handle it well in the moment, just kind of commit that to yourself and have that be ready in the future. In bold, have a punt page. Punt page being a page where you can run everything on the fly that is not pre-programmed in Skillset. It's so important, even if you're on a completely time-coded show with the same set every night and the band swears they're not going to change everything, they will. Building that page will often fall to you as the LD, even if there's a programmer. That being, you're the one out there running it. You need to know your own style. Something's happening on the fly. I feel like I'm still learning how to do this, to be honest, but it's just so valuable. Even if someone's just talking and you need to add a little flair. I like to have two separate front pages. One that exists entirely as a new song. They do an audible song. Hey, we're adding this tonight. 10 seconds before it's happening, you can go and have that be your song, happy little song. But I like to have a second front page where I'm still in the same song and add on top of it. For example, if I know the band is playing, or what we call noodling, playing a little bit of an extra intro, I can add a bit of flair, but then still be ready for the actual song to go. Learn your artist geography as soon as you get the gig. Once again, you never know what's going to happen. It's also really important to look back on past tours if you've done any covers. Historically, that might come back. Know if your artist likes or will call for audience. Most of the artists I've worked for, that's a really important part of the show, whether they just want to see the audience or it's an added little bump. I would honestly say that 80% of what I'm actually doing during the show is riding this audience light, just being ready for that. The rest of the time, I'm just observing and ready to fix anything that might come up. Use changeover to your advantage. Sometimes I don't even focus certain positions during the day, especially on outdoor shows. It seems like a waste of time to do it ahead of time. If you focus the light on a keyboard stand and then it moves later, you're just going to have to do it again. During changeover, also test everything reasonably time. Sometimes you're not going to want to do video. It all depends on the feeling of the tour. But test as much as you can. Just be ready and absolutely certain that it's good to go. I'm going to talk about how the arena shows I've been on have entered the show early. What this is before the house lights go out. We've been in time code, we've had audio running, we've had video running, so we're in complete show condition to identify if there's a problem. We have a few minutes to fix it. Sometimes it's a video countdown. And because you're the person taking the tour out and you need that time to identify potential problems, it's good to kind of speak up and see if there's a way to do that. Also, timing is key. Once again, even if it's completely time-coded, don't get too comfortable. You're still going to need to fire your macros on time to change songs. Just some other quick little thoughts. If I have a backup console, I usually leave it locked during the show. A lot of times it's honestly just to show off a cool lock screen that I might have photoshopped. And it also eliminates any accidents with guests. Talk briefly about house lights, which is really important to the overall show. For a club show, figure out where they're controlled from during the day. It's a definite bonus if you have access to it in the front of the house. If not, you might need to agree on a hand signal or a flashlight with the house crew. Just keep in mind that when it's actually showtime, there will be more people there and it'll be harder to see any signals that are agreed on. In an arena, know who's making the call. A lot of times it'll be the PM making the call, production manager, relaying it to me over radio or comm, and then I call it to whoever's operating, usually on intercom with me in the follow spots. Make sure the person who's running the house lights is there with you 5 minutes before the show and shortly before the last song, because the last thing you want is to have to hunt them down. My personal biggest fear is calling for house lights to go off and nothing happening. Hasn't happened to me yet, but I really don't want it to. And find out ahead of time if there's anything that can go off. That's another reason why it's important to focus without house lights on during the day. Sometimes I run into club shows where there's monitors over the bar or certain lights that just can't go off. It's good to know that ahead of time, and you can tell the perfect people who the artist isn't surprised. Follow spots. I really love calling follow spots. I could probably give a whole webinar about it, but I know other people are. Once again, use changeover to your advantage. This is when you should be meeting your spots during your talk and final checks. Make sure they all know what number they are, because you don't accidentally want 2 different spot 3s. Most of the arena shows I've done have ground controlled spots. I rarely have run into follow spots in a club or theater situation, just because it's not programmed for that. So we're going to assume that the ground controlled spots are the new norm. And those are spotlights that are still physically up in the air, but are controlled from the ground either with a joystick or kind of a pod, determining where they go. Those are going to mainly be programmed into cues. Once again, in my experience, however, we're able to do it on the fly. And you don't have to call them the same as a traditional follow spot. It's good to have a good speech prepared. I like to leave the operation, teaching the operation of them to my crew, because they're the ones setting it up every day and can troubleshoot that. But then I go in afterwards and talk about all aesthetic or show needs, and we can test in full conditions. Make sure they know what they have control of and what they don't, and what to do in any circumstances where something's happening on stage that is not necessarily reflected in what is pre-programmed. I still am always ready for a traditional front of house follow spot. One of the shows I was on was an outdoor show with a long thrust stage sticking out from the main stage, so we just couldn't always reach it with the overhead follow spots. So I'd still have to call that traditional one in tandem with the ground controlled spots and make sure it looks like one cohesive unit. If you have that, that's who you're going to be interacting with most in the show. I have to call those front of house spots A or B, and that's how I refer to them. Or if there's just one front of house, and then all of the other spots will be numbered. Always call everything exactly the same every day. I make sure I have very clear terminology I use when I'm speaking with them. So for example, slow fade means 3 seconds out. Quick fade to half means 1 second out to half intensity. Make your expectations clear too. For me, that's that I will always give a standby whenever possible. Sometimes I jump the gun and give a standby too soon, and I have to give a second standby and make sure they know that that's a tendency of mine. Sometimes I'll also say go ahead and I make it clear that just because it contains the word go, they should still go. Even if I don't give a standby, I like to make sure that they know to go and be ready as quickly as they can. If they don't hear the word go, to not ever feel like something should be happening on stage and kind of go rogue. Once again, it's just very clear. The more precisely you can define things to your follow spots, the closer it's going to be day to day. Also, learn band dynamics. By that I mean sometimes the lead singer is going to need to be lit more than the rest of the band. If it's between songs and the singer's talking, should you like just that person or should you like the whole band? Learn kind of the expectations there of the unit. Key light we're going to do really quickly. This is about planning it out smartly in your show file. For clubs, keep in mind you're going to have a mix of conventional LED and living head front lights throughout the tour. So just be prepared for those changing needs. Just inhibitors. So for example, on St. Motel, I usually have a front light on the drummer. And because we had a backdrop, I'd have to keep it tighter so we didn't have lights go all over. But because it's tighter, it's now a brighter output on him, so he would need his own inhibitor to lower the level across the board. I'd also add special buttons every day. For example, if I'd have a moving light that was a special on the keyboard stand or something in front of house or far stage right or stage left, I'd often use the same light and just have a position program for all of those that I was able to just tap and have it go to as opposed to having multiple different lights. Just make sure you carve out a space in your show file that you can change every day and still has enough room for whatever you need to do that day. This applies a little bit in arenas, but it'll be the same day to day where, you know, between songs you're going to want to have something you can always get to that will just bring up the program follow spots, or just change the color, or just do an aspect of it. And also always have a transition look ready. Again, even if you don't normally need it, one day you might. This shouldn't be just on the front page. This should always be accessible to you. Again, we're going to assume that things are time-coded. Time-code is your friend. I've seen people do really incredible things without it, but it doesn't make you any less of an LD when you're on a show that does have it. What it does is frees you up to fine-tune everything else, adjust focuses, and just be ready to fix anything as it happens. Instead of if a problem does happen and you're still trying to run the show manually, it's a lot harder to balance that. Test time code thoroughly. Again, I always have my kit during the day. And a lot of times I'll have the show time code passed to me through the front of house console. It's never enough to just test that short connection. You need to make sure that you do the entire run, because there might be issues with levels that can get you later in the day. So just test everything thoroughly. Run songs on your own with code during the day. I always do the first and last and a visually important song. Once again, just to make sure there's no weird bugs in the console. You get a feel for how it's going to look that day, and to look at those big transitional focuses like we talked about earlier. Make sure that everything flows right. This is especially important when cloning. If you do have time on a festival overnight to run the whole show, do it. If it's really cloning heavy. And learn buttons as best as you can. Even if someone else programmed the show, eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation where time code isn't working. I've personally almost had an entire show without time code, and I have had a show where every other song didn't have it. So I had to know everything that was already programmed did, and know the timing of the key stack to enable myself to replicate it to some degree. Even if you're not sure what every single button does, just have a good musical sense of the song with the main key stack and buttons that you can make something happen on time. And that is really it for the aspects of both the club and arenas. Life on the road. There's no point in doing this if you're not going to have some fun. That's me in a space blanket trying not to get sunburned one day. It's really important to keep in mind that on tour you're paid not just for your skills, but to be a fun part of the team. Be someone that people want to be stuck with in the metal tube that's the bus for 6+ weeks. It's especially important when you're on a smaller tour and you're sharing the bus with artists. Like, you're there to be a good companion as well as a good LP. And for me, I think my skills are what have opened the door, but not what gives me the job. But I wouldn't be where I am without knowing this as well. Treat everybody well. What I mean by this is your actions are seen. You're going to run into people at multiple points in your career. Some days you're going to have bad days and you're going to be grumpy, but never take it out on the rest of your crew or the locals. And it's really important to keep in mind that you never know who you're working with. And finally, enjoy it. I love my job more than anything. I'm very fortunate to have worked in 15 different countries and made lots of tour families. So finally, here is my contact information, website, email, which I'm very accessible on, and Instagram, where I don't post a whole lot of lighting, but when I'm on the road, I do a lot of tour updates. So I'd like to open up for questions.
Okay, we do have some questions. The first one is asking, what was a mistake that you experienced that you feel would most benefit someone who is starting out? Really learning how to organize your show file. I've had issues on a smaller show where I didn't have presets properly and was just kind of going for it. So it's really all about that organization and knowing how to change things day by day. All right, the next question is asking, what are ways to practice how to change or edit lighting cues on the fly? Get a show file from somebody, and if you can, find time code and have it run. Just see what's going to happen. Gosh, I don't know a better way to explain it. I just think I've pushed the limit during shows too many times where I have made those mistakes. Sorry, I don't have a better answer. That's okay, we have more questions. Your toolbox description was great. What is the next item you are planning to add to it? Oh my gosh, one thing I didn't mention that I'm missing is a lot of adapters. For festivals, a lot of times you'll need a 3 to 5 pin adapter, maybe even for audio or gender converter, so like male to male, female to female. Really just, I need a lot more adapters in general for video, for audio, for lighting. Those are the big things I'm consistently missing. Okay, next question is asking, through your career, what consoles have you used and what is your go-to? I actually learned on ETC consoles for theatrical lighting. So that was more where I learned the concept of programming. But those are very Q-stack based. And then ever since then, I actually had a job on MA1 briefly when I lived in Nashville, which was my introduction to more of the concert lighting philosophy. I learned the MA2, which is what I use mainly now, on a job actually when I was on CeeLo Green. I learned programming and running it on the fly with help from the designer there. And like I said, when I was working for Neon Trees, I had the opportunity to kind of be the designer, programmer, all in one. So it was really just learning to take, the way I like to think about programming is have your idea and find a way to make it work. There's always tutorials online to make a specific thing happen. Don't ever feel limited by the console software. Like, don't be like, oh, I can do this. That's now what I want to do on stage. All right, next question is asking, on average, how much time do you get to focus each day? How many focus presets are too many? On a club show, I like to keep it really small. Like I programmed the St. Motel tour that I talked about, and I probably had about 12 general focuses, and then of course there's always a few extra for specific moments or for specific lights. There's like 12 focuses that are everything. Generally like a straight, a fan,
V, and an X. Those are really like the main shapes you can make in a club, I found. And then the time there is really crunched. I'd say I probably only have about half hour to do it. And then at an arena level, there's a lot of back and forth. Like getting everything to that dot focus I talked about is a very long process. It can take about an hour or two. On my best day, I was able to focus the Imagine Dragons show. Every single light to every single position took about 2.5 hours. Again, part of that would be getting it to the dot focus during the day. And for that, we probably had about 20 focuses that were general, as well as, you know, the few additional specific moments.
Okay, next question is asking, if you had to thank one person in your development, who are you thanking?
This is an easy one. Mitchell Skellinger, Station 6, is the designer I've worked with most on Imagine Dragons and Logic. And when I talked a little bit earlier about feeling like I was malleable, a lot of what I learned about being a lighting director is from him. Because we were both a lighting director in our career, he taught me a lot of the tricks like the dot focus, as well as, you know, seeing potential and to take over for him as lighting director for Imagine Dragons.
All right, next question. Do you use a software such as Vectorworks to draft what your lighting rig will look like? And do you use the same software for your lighting calculations?
I do work in Vectorworks quite a bit personally, but for me, it's usually doing drawings for other designers. I don't find myself often in a position where I'm designing rigs. I did a little bit when I was on trees, because there was no specific designer. I do often, if I am working on a festival, I'll send out a plot, kind of adapting the design that's already existed. I'm not sure what it means by lighting calculations in this example.
Okay. Next question, please talk about the relationship between touring LDs and house LDs. How much time do you think is fair for lead time and communication?
When I'm on an actual tour, I'm not often in communication with them ahead of time, unless we know there's going to be some sort of issue that needs to be dealt with. Like I said, I do go in about an hour before living, which gives me about half an hour of it to chat with them. I think they're a really valuable resource. A lot of times there'll be something in the house rig that is just unusual or not something that I would normally encounter. For example, if there's a bunch of lights way out at front of house, you know, I like to ask them how have other people use this, you know, kind of go off their wisdom for that. I do talk to them a bit more if it's a one-off situation.
Okay, next question. How do you handle receiving notes from the artist after a show?
This is part of your pride almost. Again, it's all about the show. I think that's really an important thing to keep in mind as a lighting director. If you do mess up, it's not a personal fault. Everyone just really wants the show to be the best it can. I'm going to be adaptable and keep that in mind at all times. You know, we're just trying to put on the best thing we can.
All right, we have another question. Do you have your own personal headset or use what the tour or festival provides?
I personally do not have my own. I do like to have a single house though, because I almost always will have my in-ear monitors in, and it's just more comfortable to have one side completely free for the in-ear monitor and then the other with the monitor out and I'm hearing the headset.
All right, another question. What makes you happy to see when you walk into a venue and what scares you to see?
Happy to see lots of lights in the air. Just the more things you have to play with, the more fun you'll have. Scariest things I've seen, hate low ceilings. not just because it's harder to fit things in, but it also limits, like what I talked about, vertical motion for your focuses. It just makes everything a lot harder. I've also run into some situations where there's not a clear center line, which is why I was talking a lot about learning how to deal with physical spacing, kind of balancing the limitations of what you have versus what you need to achieve.
All right, it looks like that was the last question. So Sarah's contact information is up on the screen. It sounds like she's open to receiving questions from you after the presentation if you think of anything else. Sarah, thank you so much for the presentation. We really appreciate you taking your time today. And for everyone who attended, thank you for being a part of our webinar series. If you're interested in attending any of the future webinars, you can check out the full calendar at pro.harman.com. By next week, I will be adding 20 additional sessions for July to it, so please take a look at that calendar. And again, thank you for taking your time with us, and have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.